Going on Sniffari. That's right, I didn't say Safari, I said Sniffari. That is going to be the topic of this episode of Chi Life, as well as the importance of nasal breathing. Okay, so one last vlog on a topic that came out of my interactions with people around these workshops that I've just done in and around Melbourne. And yeah, and then I think I'm probably done with vlogs for the day. It's a beautiful sunny day here in Melbourne. I'm still here. I'm flying out later on today. But boy, it's pretty hot. All right, so I'm going to come back to what a Sniffari is later on in the vlog. So if you're curious about that, hopefully you'll make it through to the end, or you can probably skip ahead as well. But I'm going to start by talking a little bit about the importance of nasal breathing. Now, of course, breathing plays a big role in Qigong. So much so that the Chinese character for Qi is also used often to just mean breath. Like the two are so synonymous. The idea of our internal energy is so connected to our breath. And within Qigong principles, the common ones we often refer to, we talk about using three main tools: the mind, the body, and the breath, and using these together as a way to tune into and work with our energy. So breathing's really, really important within Qigong practices. And there are times within different practices where we do specifically breathe through the mouth. Sometimes we can breathe through our mouth. It does have a role. Sometimes it's really useful. But within the bulk of our Qigong practices, we tend to breathe through our nose, and particularly inhale through our nose, and most of the time even exhale through the nose as well. And there's some specific reasons why we do that, and a lot of that has to do with the way that breathing through our nose filters the air. And so it filters it, it warms it, it humidifies it, so that by the time it gets to our lungs, it's protecting our delicate lungs so that they can function well and not be harmed. That's a big part of it. There are other structural reasons why we tend to breathe through our nose, because it tends to keep our body, our external muscles, more relaxed, and so that's more energy efficient and so on. So there's a whole range of reasons why we tend to breathe through our nose. And sometimes when I'm teaching about breathing in Qigong, often we're dealing with it in a relatively simple terms, because we don't need to think about and understand all of the details behind everything all of the time. It would be overwhelming. Often we're looking at in simple terms of simply the nose being a more relaxed way of breathing, the mouth being a more active way of breathing, and applying that within different practices. But there are times where it is useful to understand all of the details, and so sometimes I go into a lot more detail about this and the mechanics and chemically what's going on inside our body, and why most of the time we want to breathe through our nose, and also mechanically, and why sometimes we want to breathe through our mouth. The course that I currently do a lot of that in is in the Sniffari Qigong program, where we do a lot of breath work. Now, a lot of that are traditional practices, and so our focus is really on the energy, just primarily on the energy and what we're doing with that, working in different ways with the breath. But in that course, we also go into a lot of breathing theory to understand from a very practical nuts and bolts, physics, chemistry, psychology aspect what's going on with our breath, and that then helps us to understand what we're doing with different specific breathing practices, how we can apply that within our Qigong practice, how we can apply that in our daily lives, and so on. And one of the things I do teach about when we get it deeper into the breathing theory is the role that our nose plays in activating our brain. And this is because, our sense of smell is an interesting sense, in that many of our senses, they're a little bit limited in their application to some extent. Our vision tends to be pretty good. We can see pretty far, that's great, but we can't see around things. We can't see behind this tree behind me, or this bush, or around the corner of a building, right? We have to have line of sight for it. Similarly, our hearing, our hearing can be pretty good, not as good as a dog's or something like that. And our hearing, certainly we can hear in all directions around us, and we can often hear things that might even be behind a tree or around a corner, something like that. But it relies on whatever that thing is making a sound, moving, or making a sound in some other way. So if there's, something in our environment that would be useful for us to pay attention to, and it's not in our line of sight, and it's not moving, it's not making a noise, our best sense for detecting this is usually our sense of smell. So from a primal perspective, our sense of smell was really, really important. Really important for sensing things like, things that might be dangerous to us. So for example, if there was a tiger around the corner, if we've got a sensitive sense of smell, even though we can't see it, even though it might be being very still, we still might be able to smell it. And even though, neither of us can see each other, whatever it is, we might be able to smell it. And that gives us maybe, hopefully, enough of a forewarning that we might be able to get away from that tiger, but if it isn't going to be happy with us being in its environment, or, let us get away from it. Other things that might be a danger to us as well. So, maybe fire or things like that. Often we can smell it before we can sense it in another way. Equally, things that might be beneficial to us. Again, our sense of smell can help us identify this. So a good example of this is food, right? So again, we're looking for food. We can't see it. It's not line of sight. It's not moving a lot of the time. I mean, if it's an animal, it might be moving. But if it's a plant of some sort, a fruit or a berry, it's not moving. It's not making a sound. A sense of smell can be really useful for discovering that hidden food, that hidden opportunity. Smell applies to other things as well. So again, as I mentioned, this came out of a discussion, an interaction around these workshops, and it was with Susan, who's a forest therapy guide. I've talked about in some of the other vlogs. Again, I'll put a link to their forest therapy, the INTFA Forest Therapy Association below if you're interested in more about forest therapy, because we were talking about smell, and particularly about the Sniffari. I'll come back to that soon. But yeah, when we were talking about this and the way our smell works, and she said, like finding a mate, which is true. Pheromones, we're often not consciously aware of it, but it's like, yeah. And even just back to the food, being able to use our sense of smell. Is the food good or is it not good? It's really, really important smell in a primal way. We tend not to rely on it as much these days, but it's still really important. It's still wired in. And so when we're healthy, ideally, we're breathing through our nose basically all the time. And there's all these physiological reasons, that I've mentioned before, filtering the air, mechanical reasons, and what it does to the tension of our muscles, things like that. But part of this as well is just about being aware of what's going on around us. Because if we're breathing through our nose, particularly inhaling more than exhaling, but breathing through our nose, then we're constantly sampling the smells around us. And this is going to give us a little cue of, maybe there's something, either something dangerous or something beneficial to pay attention to. And so when we get a little bit of some of those chemicals giving those smells, either of danger or something good, what do? We sniff. And basically the sole purpose of sniffing, except for occasionally to clear something out of our nostrils, is to make our brain pay attention. To make it pay attention to whatever it is. It's just had a little whiff of it, and it's like, okay, there's something there. We sniff to try to identify what that is. And so when we sniff, our brain lights up. It's wired in to wake up our brain, to pay attention, to identify things. So anyway, we're having a good discussion about this, and we talked about a few other things to do with breathing through the nose, and how it's something, and like if you think about this now that I talk about it, you might not have noticed it before, but you might notice that there are some people in, particularly in New Zealand, I find there's quite a lot of people like this, but it can be in other parts of the world as well, where they have perpetually blocked sinuses. And so they may still breathe through their nose, but it's partially obstructed, or they may stop breathing through their nose and actually breathe through their mouth. And it's There's lots of things that can cause that. One of the big ones, I think, that often affects people in New Zealand is dampness in your environment, which then you might have some mold in your environment, and your body wants to shut that out, and so starts to block the sinuses. But it can also be an indicator of just persistent low, well, not even necessarily low, but persistent ongoing stress. Because of the way sniffing and smelling activates our brain, activates our system, sometimes when we're overactivated and our brain's like, enough, it will cause the sinuses to block up as a way to reduce that source of stimulation and to actually force us towards breathing through our mouth. Because I didn't talk about this so much yet, but breathing through the mouth, some of the main applications of breathing through the mouth, some are to clear things out of our body, but another one is for physical exertion, getting stuff done. It's like, there's something you need to attend to. I'm going to force you to actually do something about it. I'm going to make your mouth breathe. But then we don't actually address it. We don't get it sorted out. And if there's this ongoing level of stress, one of the things it can do is block up the sinuses. And if this continues for a long time, there's a flow-on effect, because perpetually not breathing well through the nose can affect our health in some pretty major ways. And it can affect our heart health, it can affect our immune system, it can affect the health of our nervous system, it can affect our hormones, all these things. And it's something that just accumulates little by little over time, but it can really harm our health. So if you're someone who has a perpetually blocked nose and sinuses, it's not that you need to go, rushing off to the hospital about it or something like that. But it's well worth looking into and seeing if there's a way you can resolve that. And as I mentioned, sometimes it can be to do with damp, to do with mold, sometimes it can be to do with allergies. Often we can actually resolve it just through working with our breath and retraining ourselves to use our nose more. So that's something you might want to look into. But anyway, how did we get into this whole topic? It was, again, because we were talking about forest therapy and some of the cool things they do as part of forest therapy. And one of the things that Susan does and that the guides that she trains does is they take people on a Sniffari. And this is an exercise they do as part of their forest therapy walks, where as part of the walk they will go and intentionally find leaves of different plants and rub them and smell them and just identify and notice the different smells around them. And the reason why they do this is because, again, as I mentioned in one of the previous vlogs, forest therapy is all about looking at not just in a feel-good way, being in nature and that being good for you, but looking at what has been researched and what there's evidence for in terms of the specific benefits that you can get from being in nature and interacting with nature. One of the things that has been researched is the way our sense of smell affects our brain health, and particularly our memory and the onset of illnesses like Alzheimer's. And it's been studied and shown that if you regularly exercise your sense of smell, it can delay the onset of Alzheimer's. And it makes perfect sense, understanding how, using our sense of smell naturally wakes up our brain. So you're like giving your brain a little bit of a workout every time you use your sense of smell. And so I thought that was like a really cool exercise, a really fun, enjoyable one to do when you're out in nature, with really clear benefits. Now, as I mentioned, breath plays a really big role in Qigong, so much so that the character Qi is the same character often used just to mean breath or breathing. And most of the time, that's what we focus on. We're focusing on the breathing and how we're breathing and so on, which is really valuable, really important. Smell sometimes plays a role in Qigong practices, but it tends to be more of a peripheral thing rather than a main focus, except for in very, very specific sort of applications. But it all ties together, and it ties together with the power of our environment and being connected to nature and so on, which is a big important thing in Qigong as well. So I thought that was just a cool little thing, and this is one of the things that comes from interacting with different people, something that's so nice. People who are doing not necessarily the same but related things, just draws out different details, different ways of thinking, different insights about things that we do. And yeah, I thought the Sniffari, so sniff, smell, Ari, as in like, going and, safari, going out into the wilderness. I thought a Sniffari was a pretty cool idea that I would share with you. All right, I hope you enjoyed that one. I look forward to seeing you on another vlog soon.